With the Super Bowl coming to the DFW area, that doesn't just mean thousands of fans are going to be coming to the stadium. In fact, big sporting events are often huge targets for sex trafficking.
I had no idea that this was going on.
Yes, that's a huge shocker to me.
Rachel Adcock, a volunteer for sex trafficking awareness, says she isn't surprised that several students aren't aware that events like the Super Bowl attract the buying and selling of American children.
I think in general, it's just not an issue that TCU students are particularly concerned about, and I don't know why they would be, because of course it doesn't affect you directly, but it's something they should be concerned about because it's here, it's happening, and it's not going to go away.
Elisa Jordheim is part of Traffic 911, a team that works to stop sexual slavery of American children for profit and pleasure. Jordheim says when looking out for pimps trafficking at the Super Bowl, don't expect them to be wearing gold chains and a white fur coat. More cases show mothers selling their children, from which they are then prepared to be trafficked.
They bring them in through what's called a 2-week boot camp, where they literally will starve them, bring them into psychological and physical trauma. They gang rape them. It's very intentional what they do. They traumatize these kids so much that they literally will say, if you don't do this, I will get your family. And the reality is these kids know they will. They will go after my family.
People often think that this is an issue that happens in other countries and can't be happening in the Dallas-Fort Worth area at the Super Bowl.
So we know that there are between 100 and 300,000 children a year trafficked into sex trafficking in the United States. So if that's the case, and we're talking tens of thousands are trafficked into Dallas, how many already exist here in Dallas?
It isn't just Dallas. Every month, 256 young girls are trafficked into the Dallas and Fort Worth area.
When Tamia came to Canada from her native Hungary 11 years ago, she had high hopes of making money working as a domestic. Her problems began with immigration.
Why are you coming to Canada? And I said, you know, babysitting, domestic, this and that. And then hours later, the guy says, the problem is that your story doesn't match with your contract. And that was the first time that I heard that I'm here to do exotic dancing. And I signed the contract, but it was in English, so I didn't really, and they didn't really believe it at the time, so that's what greeted me. But very long story short, they let me go, and these Hungarian people and some guy picked me up from the airport.
From then on, she was a slave, forced to work as a stripper and prostitute to pay off her debt.
The people in the clubs, do you think they realized what was going on in your life? Do you think they had any idea?
No. Besides that I was 89 pounds and looked pretty sick, I think, I was smiling all the time. I was smiling because if I don't smile, I don't make money. If I don't make money, I get in trouble.
And no one would know her story today had she not finally come forward. That's the problem, according to this undercover police officer.
We know there's victims out there, but obviously if they're not willing to talk, we can't do anything. We know what this guy's doing or this trafficker's doing. We need them to come forward. And to do that, we have to break that wall that the trafficker pimp has built. We have an 18-year-old girl from
It's a wall that is meticulously constructed and protected, not with chains, but control.
What's the motivation?
Money. It's always money. Money for the trafficker, and it's very lucrative.
The UN estimates profits from human trafficking at $32 billion a year, the majority coming from sex slavery.
If I see the word young 18 or 19-year-old girl or whatever it is.
And while most Canadians think trafficking happens elsewhere, this detective says it's in our own backyard and easier to access than ever, thanks to the internet.
Just the same way the trafficker or the pimp uses that to sell sex, I'm using it as an investigative tool to find them. And on any given day, you could go on there and you could see it by the hundreds. It's newspaper ads, it's in our massage parlors, it's in our strip clubs, it's everywhere. I would be safe to say there's not an adult entertainment establishment in the region of Peel that does not have a victim of human trafficking in it.
Does she have a jacket? She doesn't even have a jacket.
Police work is not just getting into the mind of the predator, but the prey. Once they do, the police can bring perpetrators to justice. What they aren't able to do is help the victims get back to life.
They come with us. They give us their statement. They tell us their little life story. And at the end of the interview, they're looking at you across the table and saying, well, now what do I do? And that's their biggest fear.
Most victims are Canadian citizens, the majority of whom are Aboriginal girls and women. The problem is, it's a difficult crime to track and quantify, though Canada Fights Human Trafficking is overwhelmed with demands.
Canada is being inundated with people trafficking children specifically because we let them. The average sentence right now in Canada is 2.5 months. That is unacceptable. It's one thing to be a nation of mercy, but what is mercy without justice?
It's that question that prompted Winnipeg MP Joy Smith's fight.
Once I started working with the victims, I feel that the police officers and the on-the-ground people, the NGOs who work with these victims are the real heroes in this country. And I think as a parliamentarian, it's very, very necessary that Canadians are aware and know how to protect their children.
Protecting is one thing, prosecuting the crime is another. Canada's first convicted child human trafficker received a 3-year sentence for selling 2 girls aged 15 and 14. And a recent RCMP report found, despite a high incidence of the crime, only 36 cases of human trafficking made it to court. It's those kind of numbers that motivated Smith to do something about it.
If my bill passes through the Senate, we will have mandatory minimums of 5 years for people who sell children, 18 years and under. And if they rape them or do that kind of thing to them, they will get 6 years. Now that hurts me because I'd like them to have 96 years, but I would have had a court challenge. So I've had to very carefully construct that law so it wouldn't get a court challenge and that it would pass.
The good news is Bill C-268 is now law, and the government has since launched 2 national campaigns to raise awareness of human trafficking in Canada, specifically how to spot potential victims. The bad news is, despite the prevalence of this crime, there are few, if any, convictions.
Human trafficking is a growing problem in Canada, with girls being lured into the sex trade before they're old enough to enter high school.
Traffickers have the kind of greed that cannot be satisfied. They earn on average $280,000 from each victim under their control. They rarely earn enough to buy their own freedom.
You can't leave and you can't stop if you wanted to. There's a deadline. You know what I mean? It's like 50 G's, then another 50 more.
We got Jenna, 24, Sasha, open-minded.
The exploitation has gone even deeper underground.
New to the business, new to the city, 19 years of age, red flag.
Images clog the internet. Streams of ads drive authorities to search for underage girls, those being held against their will. Most end up on Vancouver's downtown east side.
It's not as well known as it should be.
Police forces across the country work relentlessly to track the transfer of these women from province to province.
It's as tawdry as a Hollywood screenplay, but it actually happens. People come from the countryside, so to speak, into the bright lights of the city.
It is war, and this is their battlefield, the place where they confront their enemies every night. An ugly existence they were manipulated into.
So we were like little bunnies, fresh meat. We were like prey to every pedophile pimp, and they were just waiting for us.
Barely in her teens, she was recruited.
And at 14 years old, kids are putting on makeup, they're going to the mall, they're doing these kinds of things, and I am being groomed by 2 young girls who are being prostituted.
But their uncomfortable stories help give a voice to an ever-growing reality.
If we can just believe this is something that happens in other people's backyards, then we don't have to look at what's my role in this, right? And it just seems easier to think it's somebody else's problem.
But the problem has swelled into a $32 billion industry, more profits than Nike, Google, and Starbucks combined. Recent changes have been made to the criminal code, amendments that include specific child trafficking charges, giving authorities more power to prosecute.
For me, it runs close to home. I kind of know the end result of human trafficking.
After being sold into the sex trade, Angel's mom was murdered by notorious BC serial killer Robert Pickton.
And finally, the cold, brutal truth came knocking at the door, which was a police officer. They decided to tell me that your mother's jawbone was found in a pigsty.
A disturbing number of Aboriginal women get trapped in the trade, forced into a dark underworld, losing sight of reality.
I was about 11, 12.
They no longer want to be shamed into silence.